Now that we have a basic overview of Xcode, we can now go on to create actions and outlets. And what these are basically is how we control objects on our screen. For example, an action is something that the user interacts with, such as a button. And an outlet is something that gets displayed from within the application, such as a web view displaying a web page. Now there is two ways to create an action and an outlet. So what we want to do first is kind of go into our main.storyboard and place some objects on our screen for us to create the action and outlets for. So once we've loaded up our interface, if you haven't already, make sure that you have the utilities tab open up on the right. I'm going to select our attributes inspector, and at the bottom here I'm just going to bring up our objects. If you haven't done this already or it's not displaying, this is a simple way how to get them to display. And what we're going to be basically doing is creating an action for a button and an outlet for a label. So if I just quickly scroll down, I can clearly see there's my label. Just click and hold and drag it in. I'm going to do the same thing to the button underneath. What we need to do is click and hold and drag it into your interface. And from here, we can simply resize it to how we want. So I'll just make it reasonable size there, and the same goes for the label. And over on the right here, as we displayed before in our interface, we're able to customize the attributes of how an object or an outlet or anything like that, any objects can kind of display on the screen. So I'll center the text just so it looks a bit more appealing in the interface. And there we go, it's nice and centered. So like I said before, there's two ways of creating an action and an outlet. And because there is two ways, I'm going to simply highlight them, Control C or Command C and Command V, just to simply copy and paste it. So we just got two sets, so I can show you both ways. Now, like before, we can, if we simply go up to here where we got the two little circles here, this is our assistant editor. If you simply click that, like I showed you before in the interface builder lecture, you can see it loads up now to views for different parts. So you got on the left here is our interface builder, and on the right is our viewcontroller.h class. Now, the first way of creating an action and outlet is to simply, you can either control click or right click or click and drag, and you see when you do that you create this blue line. And if you just bring it over to here where we got insert action and outlet, in between our UI view controller and the at end, simply drop that in, and from here we can select if we want it to be an outlet or an action. So the button is going to be an action, so we simply select action. The name, we're going to simply give it a name, so I'll just simply name it button 1. We can choose to have an ID or anything like that, which is on a UI button. Our event is at the moment selected on touch up inside, but this is purely how you interact with the button. So we could have touch down, touch up inside, which gives the user to, if you click and hold, you can swap your finger off it and like kind of cancel the action. We got touch down drag, touch down repeat. We got all different types of events we can use to interact with stuff, and some of them only work on certain objects, and you'll find that out later on in the course. So for now I'm going to simply have this to touch up inside, and the arguments here, you can choose to have a sender or none. Again, we'll explain what these means later on in the course, but I'm going to select none now for the argument. And as soon as I hit connect, it's created our action here in our .h. And now if you go to our connections inspector, if I just cancel out now the assistant editor, go to our single view there, our standard editor, and if you go to our connection inspector just here, you'll see now that in our sent events, our outlets collection, all you can see here, I'll just simply show our outlets there. So in our sent events, you can see our button 1 action is now linked up to our UI button in here. And we can do the exact same thing if I bring up the assistant editor again for our label. But before we do that, if you simply just after the UI view controller, simply do a space, do a parentheses bracket there and press enter. Right, this now separates the outlets from the actions. So we simply again do exactly the same on our label. Control click or left click and drag and paste it in between the two brackets this time. And this time make sure it's selected on an outlet. And the name, I'll simply name it label 1, as we've got two versions of labels. and we can have it's already on the type is UI label, and you can have strong or weak. We'll just keep it on strong and connect that. So once again in our connections inspector, if I just click on our view controller here, you can see now in our outlets we've got UI label, and it's now linked up to our label. So that's one way of creating an action and an outlet. But the beauty of doing it through the assistant editor, if I come off that now and head over to our viewcontroller.h, you can see that it's all linked in there. There was no needing to type it out, which is the second way of doing it. But the beauty of doing the assistant editor, when we go into our viewcontroller.n, where we tell our objects and actions what to do, you can see it's already created an action just here. So there's our button 1 action. Okay then, so the second way to do it is not from the interface and the assistant editor. As easy as that was, and you probably will prefer that over doing the second way, but the second way is kind of hard coding it, and has been around before the assistant editor came out, and I believe it was Xcode 5. Okay, so what we need to do is go into our viewcontroller.h, and this time we need to write it out ourselves. So to create an outlet, we simply have to select or type out IB outlet, which is the outlet function, and then we need to type out what type of outlet we're going to be using. Now, as a label is called a UI label, we simply type UI label and then do a space. Then we do an asterisk, and now this is the name we're going to give it. Now, the first one we gave it label 1 name, so this one we're going to give it label 2 name. And there we go. So now once we've done that, we need to create our action. Again, we simply do dash space bracket capital IB action, because that's what we're going to be using. Now it's already bringing up our selector on the end. Now we don't really need that for the momentarily now. This is when we come to teaching you how to switch views, but we come to further that in our course anyway. So this one's going to be called button 2. Now I'm just going to get rid of our sender and our ID, as we don't need it for anything at the moment. So there we go. But the difference is, now that when we created our IB action, it would automatically create it in our .m. Unfortunately, it hasn't created it in here, because this is our the second way of doing it. This is kind of the hard code way. This is the manual way of doing it. As you can see, the interface builder, you can do the assistant editor. It's a lot quicker to develop. So again, here we'll have to create our own one. So IB action. We simply name it button 2, which is what we called it. And we need to get rid of the sender and the ID. Space, bracket, and press enter. So it's all created there in front of us. But the only difference now is that we've created it, but we haven't kind of linked it up to our second action button and label as we did in the interface builder. So if we just go into our main.m, you can our main.storyboard, sorry, you click on our button for our first one, you can see it's already linked up to button 1, and the same goes for the label linked up at label 1. But we haven't selected this button or label to be linked up to anything, as because we're doing it the manual way. And to do that, we simply click on View Controller here, or if you can't see it, there's a View Controller on the left here. And then make sure you're selected on our Connections Inspector tab on the right. And you can see here, Label 2 has got nothing, it's completely blank. And all you need to do is simply, on this little circle at the end, click, hold and drag to our label, and it's linked up perfectly. The same goes for our button, but this one is a little bit different on an action. Simply do the same again, but when we let go of our click, it brings up now the events in which we want to interact with our button. And as before, we use touch up inside. We simply click touch up inside, and now the action is all linked up to our button. So that's simply how you create and link up actions, both in the assistant editor and doing it manual way. So there's 2 ways you can do it, whatever suits you best.